Hello, everyone. How are you this evening? I wanted to start off our little book talks in my books and with a few tips on writing. So, this is something that I think you will enjoy. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the two books, last two books, which is Enslaved, which is this one here. And I'll give you a bigger picture of it so you can see it closer. Enslaved and Enslaved Part Two, Princess Gemma. Now I'm just going to talk a bit about Enslaved first, which is the first book in this series. I would love for each one of you to have the experience I had when I did the research on this book. One of the things that I absolutely loved about it was learning so much about our culture and our past, because that period of time for many of us is very painful even today. We think of that and we think of the brutality and the suffering that our people had to live through and survive. And because they survived, we're here, which is a gift. And it gave me a lot of uh, emotional feelings all during the process, because one of the things I did, and I advise anyone to do this, I found as much as I could, as many books as I could, to give me an idea of what it was actually like. And I even went to the museum in Baltimore where they have a slave ship built into the basement. And I went down there and I stayed there for a few minutes just to internalize that experience. And it was overwhelming. It was so overwhelming that my cousin and I, Clara Brown, she's now deceased, but we both were so overwhelmed with that place that demonstrated what the actual uh, structure of the bottom of that slave ship looked at like for our people. And the question that we both asked was, could I have possibly survived it? And I think on a lot of levels, I say yes, because I'm determined, I'm a strong person. But on the other hand, I don't know if I could have. When you seriously think about living under those conditions for weeks at a time, with the bodies stacked on top of each other and the human debris coming down on the person on the bottom, it was totally humane. Not to mention the rodents and the bugs and the heat and whatever the circumstances were. The motion of the ocean, where many of these people had never been on a ship before. The other thing I did, which I absolutely love, was I read many slave narratives, because not only did we take Princess Gemma, who's the main character of this story, did we take her from her. We started out talking about her village, which is another separate series of research that I had to do. But like I said, looking at those African traditions and all the social dynamics and the family structures, things of that sort, all that helped to build this amazing book. But the most powerful thing that I came away with was the helplessness of our people who were chained to the bottom of that ship. Many of them force fed. If you're ever in Philadelphia, if you live in Philadelphia, please go to the Lest We Forget Museum, because they have all the paraphernalia that was used during the slave trade. And it's amazing. They even had small wrist chains for little babies. I mean, the little things were like this, that locked around the baby's arms. So this is something that we all must take a look at. And I think all of our history serves its purpose, because it teaches us to be stronger, and it teaches us the value of our lives today. So enslaved, okay, it was a book that started out in Africa showing how this princess was raised and how her family taught her to be a leader and to be a support for the husband they knew she would marry one day, because at birth she was promised to another tribe to marry this son of the king of that particular tribe. So that's something that in a lot of forms is still going on in some tribes today, especially in the rural areas of Africa. And some of the traditions are still a part of that tradition, and some of the value systems are taken from that. Now, most of the society in Africa was matriarchal, and as far as who assumed leadership, and the women would get together and make those decisions. So that's not something that I think is very interesting. And of course, kind of stands to reason why some of the things that they did at the time were valid. And one person that I talked to, who's a professor of African American studies, said they did this because they didn't want the men fighting among themselves about who was going to rule. They had an objective group of women who came together and made those decisions if there's a question or a need to change the tradition. And there was like a women's council that oversaw this whole process. And that was interesting. So when you do research as a writer, it's important that you uncover little gems that will fit nicely in your story. And one of the things I loved about it was the whole process, which took about 4 years to do the research. And it was the most interesting thing that I have ever participated in, as far as, collecting books, reading magazine articles, reading the slave narratives from many different sources, and I have quite a collection of them myself. This that is something, when you live those moments with those people, when they talk about their master or the women who married those men who created the system of chaos, and their whole demeanor, their role in the family, the children's roles, the roles of the house slave, and or I should say, house enslaved person. This is something that we need to take a look at, particularly because we need to kind of line that up with what we're doing today, and how this patriarchal system has really encroached on our lives in so many different ways and aspects today. So enslaved was a wonderful experience as far as research is concerned, but it was also very painful. And when you read and study these documents, you become involved in them, and they become a part of you. So that's the one thing that we must do, because if it becomes a part of you, it's going to show in your writing. It's going to be that gem and that special moment that reader is going to touch that person, that character, mentally and spiritually. She's going to connect with that person because you connected with that person. You gave that person life, and this reader brings that person to life as she reads it in her own mind and in her own environment. So it's very special, and it's a special relationship that the writer has with the characters in her book, or in his book. It's important that we realize that, we acknowledge that, and make sure that we do what we must do in order to get the depth and the understanding of who this person was. Character studies is one of the most important aspects of writing. You can't write about anything you don't know. And in this particular instance, we had a silent character that spoke loudly throughout the first part of the book, which was the slave ship. The slave ship itself was a character. And not to mention all the people who worked on the slave ships and the dynamics between them. All of this is a wonderful emotional and universal experience that we have when we write, because we're able to touch different periods of history that are so precious and should never be forgotten. I don't care how painful it is. If our ancestors could live through that, we can at least read it, study it, and understand it. And that's something we must do for our children, to let them know the possibilities. And sadly, that is still a possibilities. And the emotional drain it takes on a nation, a family, and an individual when we practice hatred. It's a crippling system. And I think that's one of the things that's happening today with all of the political nonsense that's going on. All that negativity is affecting the universe and how the universe reacts. So prayerfully, we'll get our handle on that and look for better times. And and we have to make sure we do everything we can do to turn things around. And one of the things I always felt in my writing and in my life is that our spiritual connection to the world and to the people on the earth, to the planet, to the things on the planet, the plants, the animals, that spiritual connection, and the earth. Let's not forget the earth. But let us take that spiritual connection to develop our own spiritual selves and create balance within ourselves. That makes you a better writer. That makes you a better person. So I ask you to take this journey and it your research. Take your time. Do the work. It's difficult sometimes. It's hard to get to the library, but the best person you can touch in your research is your fellow librarians. They can give you wonderful documents you never knew existed. So use that library. Use it, and ask questions. They're ready to help you, and they're anxious to help you, because many times no one asks them anything of importance. So a project like this, I was given so many documents, I was flooded with them. And I spent many times in that private library where the archives are. And those documents you have to handle with a glove. You can't handle them with your hand. So it's important to have those experiences as a writer. So when you write about a person, you have to make that person live. And the way you do that is through your research. And also the other thing that we're going to be talking about is the next week, we'll be talking about character development as we talk about these two stories. Princess Gemma was raised, like I said, to study herbs, to study anything that her tribe would need in order to function. Because not only were the customs and traditions and the education of the young people was a part of her responsibility, she had to be able to advise her husband. She had to be able to advise the other women in the tribe. She had to be a resource person for all the people, including her husband. So these are things that her aunt and her mother taught her. This role as being a princess is not just in the American sense, wearing a tiara. It's about using your head, your real crown, to develop skills and knowledge to help other people. And we must think of that today. We are all from royal backgrounds. And as a people, because we were God's chosen people, we were the first people on the earth. And to think of that, 600,000 years, we were here before any other race. So we had a foundation. And think about it. We kept this earth at peace. We did not rob it of its resources. We did not rape it for its jewels or anything of that sort, or the oil under the ground. This was a stable environment for over 600,000 years. And then the others came. So we need to take a look at how we function in this world and how we function on our planet, because it's so important that we understand this, and it's equally important that we teach it to our children. So when you sit down to your computer, I want you to do the work so that that experience can come through your writing. So even before you make the first note on who your characters are, or whatever the nature of the story is, the first thing you want to do is the topic. What topic are you writing on? Like I'm doing enslaved. So I'm going to read everything I can. Everything I can. I'm going to read documentaries. I'm going to read, like, one of the great things I did was to read the original notes from Christopher Columbus and those people that were on that boat and those other slave ships. I went and found documents that belong to people who worked on those ships. And it gave me a greater understanding of that environment other than what I saw in Baltimore in the bottom of that museum, the reconstructed slave ship or slave quarters on the ship. So one of the things that you must do is to research. Okay? All right. And we'll talk about another aspect of writing. And we're going to talk about how that affected the words that went into my book, Enslaved. And I want you to take your time. Don't rush it. It takes time to write a book. And if you want it to be of value, you want to use that experience to the best of your abilities. And I will not fail to mention that this artwork on the book was done by my brother, Louis Charles Hargro. He's a magnificent artist, as you can see. This is one of my favorite book covers, along with the second one, which was done by my niece, Brina Hargro. And she has a website. You can go look at some of her work. Her website is Art by Brina. Now, one of the things we have to do in the family is get my brother to build a website for himself, so you can see some of his artwork. But this is magnificent. It's magnificent. It depicts many things in that story. Now, one of the things I never, ever do is to tell an artist who's illustrating for me what to do. I tell them about the story. I let their vision and their talents stand out because it's important that they interpret and internalize. If I can't explain it to an artist what this book about, then I can't explain it to the person. I can't write about it. But I think he captured everything in his own blessed way and within the range of his talents. So this is something you want to think about doing when you get to the stage, which is like one of the final stages you get to when you are a writer. It's getting the book cover done. And I like original artwork. That's why, and my family is so talented in this area and many other areas. It was very important that I get this done by an artist, and my favorite artist. I watched this dude, my older brother. I watched him do to paint when I was going all through my school years. And it's one of my fondest memories to watch a person create something. And I thank my parents for this because everyone in our family has the capability of doing great artwork and great things, crafts, you name it. We learned that from Louis and Jessie Hargro. Okay. So I honor them as always, because I wouldn't be here without them. And I also honor the people who had to live in the deplorable conditions of these slave ships and then to come to this country to experience the slave quarters and the sad conditions that they had to endure. A final note is that I have a sister who just passed last year, Odessa Hargro Huff. She took up a skill that was passed down in our family, which is quilting. Now, she has some of the most gorgeous quilts around. One of her quilts is on tour around the country. And that's one of the things that I love about writing, because I was able to incorporate that experience in the book. Because many times this art form is overlooked. The first fabric, the first creation, or the first art form done in fabrics that was found on this earth was a quilt. And guess where that was found? You guessed it, in Africa. It's the oldest textile in the world. It's an African quilt. And it's important that we use this and use this information to teach our children. If you don't want to teach them the art of quilting, you can teach them about quilting and talk about that history and make sure they're surrounded in those things. So find somebody who sells quilts and perhaps buy one, or join a quilting group where you can make quilts for yourself, because this makes this deepen your experience as an African living in America, who, if your parentage was uh, connected to those people who travel on those slave ships. And then, but we must keep in mind that the original people on every planet on earth was us. We were the aboriginals of every country, every country. So I want you to think about that. Think about joining a quilting group. Think about starting a quilting group if you already know how to quilt. Go to some art shows and see how gorgeous they are, because our quilts are the most wonderful form of artwork. And I'm thankful to Odessa for passing that art form down to her girls. And we have a couple of nieces who are also doing excellent work, because my grandmother used to sit on the porch and teach us to do this. So gratefully, yeah, I am pleased to have had this experience growing up and to be able to connect with that part of our history and our tradition. So I want to thank you for joining me tonight and for allowing me to come into your home and discuss one of my favorite subjects, which is writing. Okay. So you have a great night. Love to you and love to all the persons that you love. And you take care. God bless and good night.